Absolute Martian Manhunter is amazing, and there's a reason we waited for the second issue instead of just covering the first. But what this does is this opens up with basically Detective John Jones dying. Now, what's interesting about this is that unlike what we're traditionally used to, John Jones is not what the Martian Manhunter becomes. Instead, there's something much different going on here. But as he's basically laying dying, he seemingly just recovers, right? And then, of course, he ends up talking to a doctor who's kind of filling him in on the damage that he sustained as a result of the injury that almost killed him. And the doctor tells him, right, I was saying that your scans look good, a little swelling of the brain, a light concussion, take a week or two off from work and come in if you start experiencing headaches, nausea, vomiting, visions, confusion, etc. I just don't want to push it. What's going to be kind of crazy about this is he's going to experience all those things. And in fact, he already does. Because initially what happens is he starts smoking in the hospital, which is a big no-no. But he also has this vision of an explosion. And so where the doctor's like, you can't do that, right? You're not supposed to smoke in here. He's like, well, then where's all this smoke coming from? But it's not some gray, misty substance. It's all in varying colors. More so than that, as he's talking with his wife, she's kind of flabbergasted by everything the doctor was talking about. But what he discusses are things the doctor didn't say, right? His wife is having an affair, and he doesn't know what to do about it. The poor guy still loves her. But where the doctor hadn't really revealed any of that information, John was picking up on it. He was effectively reading his mind, right? And his wife even goes so far as to say that there's no way he could recover this fast, right? The building he was in exploded. So again, providing a bit of context to the scenario that led to him encountering the Manhunter in the first place. But again, a lot of this is kind of mysterious and cloak and dagger, because what this does is it puts off this idea that maybe there's some kind of schizophrenia going on, right? Some kind of mental illness going on with John Jones, because he starts to see this multicolored smoke. He starts to look at the lighter and sees it's completely changing into a different color. That when he looks at somebody's fingernails, when he looks at the hair on the judge, that when he's having this conversation, right, with his own superiors, that suddenly everything around him starts to shift and change. The conversation with his superiors is particularly important because that comes off the heel of a conversation with his wife where she wants to go on a vacation, right, that he needs to kind of break from everything that's going on, especially after a near-death experience. But when he's talking to his superiors, he's like, no, like, I want to work, right? I don't really want to go anywhere. I don't want to take a vacation. And so they more or less sideline him and they hand the whole explosion over to somebody else, if for no other reason than he's essentially compromised. And so on the surface, it would seem like a good idea for him to investigate it because he would want to get to the heart of the matter and how it all happened. But the fact is, because he's emotionally compromised, he wouldn't be able to be impartial to the investigation, which is really what's required here. But he kind of muses to himself along the way. He explains what it is that he does. He says that he's part of the Stochastic Terrorism Task Force, that they try to understand why people do the things they do, to predict dangerous behavior, identify individuals that pose a threat to the public, and stop them before they do something that hurts themselves or others. That it's a little like trying to read minds, that they're like those fortune tellers at carnivals, the psychics on late night TV, and about as accurate. And he says the problem is you can never really know someone not like they know themselves. But that's where you find out he's actually being watched by the Manhunter. And the Manhunter speaks in a kind of broken language, right? Martian, distant, different, alien, that kind of thing. And so what he starts to realize is that things around him are somewhat strange, right? As he's investigating the explosion, he's investigating potentially the person who caused it. He says you look for warning signs. And as he's talking to Miss Miller, she's giving him what little information she can. And he says, how do I know the bomber's mother hates pickles, that she always gave hers to him, right? How do I know that the bomber and his lifelong best friend made love one summer and never spoke of it again, not even to each other? How do I know the bomber's neighbor is telling the truth, but trying to hide her near daily use of cannabis? And so as he goes through, right, he says, you look for identifiable patterns, anything to make the world not random. That's what stochastic means, random. And he says, but how do I know? And so again, this whole situation has created something of a rift between himself and his wife, that he's almost separated, that they're almost estranged to a degree, not in the sense that they're just sort of two individual people occupying the same home, neither one having anything to do with the other. It's more that it's just kind of a difficult situation because he comes back and she's like, so no vacation? And he's like, no vacation. But clearly he's lying to her, that her superiors told him to take a vacation, and he's the one that rejected the idea, that he wants to get to the bottom of it all. But when he's looking down at the cutting board, right, where his wife is cutting vegetables, he sees the Manhunter. Memory of living music, dancing in daffodil light, abstracted canyons beyond physical and form, waves of quantum foam gently lapping. Again, it's this kind of crazy, weird, disembodied type situation. When he's talking to his son, who he is a little distance from, again, he kind of sees the Manhunter. That when he's created these kind of clay models of, the family and everything, he's like, well, I mean, where am I at, right? Where's daddy? He shows him what's basically Martian Manhunter. And so he says, I stay awake all night, trying not to think of the smoke, of what's waiting for me in it. Have you ever tried not to think of something? It's all you can think of. And so again and again and again, this situation presents itself when he's in the doctor's office, right, getting some measure of a checkup, right? After this, the possible aortic dissection in 3, then the knife wound in 7, shattered pelvis in 4, and right, it's just kind of this nonsensical, almost schizophrenic type thing, right? Is he losing his mind? Is he hallucinating all these things? Not only that, as he goes to visit the mother of presumably the bomber, he says as she speaks, she starts to smoke. Not like a cigarette, but she herself starts to smoke. Steam pours out of her ears like an angry cartoon. I breathe it in. I breathe in and inhale Mike Miller's first day of school, all dressed up, adorable and terrified and full of potential. Overwhelming feeling of love and pride, plus him picking flowers for his mother's birthday, and the crushed look on his face the day I told him his father wouldn't be coming home. No, I didn't tell him, she told him, right? That kind of thing. He's inhaling people's memories, right? He's picking up on people's memories. And so he kind of staggers out of the place. And then he ends up kind of going out into the city, and he sees all these streams of colors coming out of people's heads. And this is when it all kind of starts to make sense. And again, this is why I waited till issue 2, because the first one is just bonkers. Dennis Camp is crazy. I don't know. But again, he says, I have to get out of here, have to clear my head. Memory of buying your first house. Real estate agent saying, real fixer-upper, lot of potential. And so quite literally, the memories of John Jones are being accessed by the Manhunter as John Jones is trying to understand what in the world is going on. He's like, no matter which way I walk, there's smoke. Smoke everywhere. And then you chime back. Memory of your dad finding cigarettes under your mattress saying, and where there's smoke, there's fire, right? He says the smoke is coming off of librarians and social workers and corporate lawyers. It's spewing out of accountants and couriers and construction workers, dancing tapestry of multicolored scars. It's the people. The people are all on fire, and no one seems to be bothered by it. And the smoke is filled with barroom laughter and office drama and grocery lists and someone's sainted mother saying, please, I don't understand. Like the Manhunter says, thought smoke ideas, oxidizing in the open air. Breathe in, breathe in, breathe in. And where he describes the Manhunter as green, right? Even describing the voice as green. He says, how can a voice be green? But it is. The voice is green, and it's waiting for me, always waiting for me. I can feel it following me 2 strides behind. I look around for some place to rest, but Middleton is like an alien planet. Fire hydrants, the arrangements and purpose of roads, my own reflection, all mysterious to me. And that's where he kind of starts to break a little bit, right? What's happening? Because as he's roaming down the street, everything around him is shifting and changing. What you're seeing here is how he sees things, right? What's happening to me? And that's where he's told, hidden life dimensions observed and remove, view from the outside. And he says, I run in what I hope is a direction. What I hope is a way. I pass a police station and it's incomprehensible. And he's like, what is this, right? Who is that? Who's talking? And the Manhunter says, you, me, we are talking. And he says, remember, man on fire, human flame. The smoke, what waited. And so it essentially flashes back, right? It's the idea that the Manhunter is the one that saved him from dying. And so as absolutely insane and chaotic as this first issue is, Dennis Camp finally does us a solid and makes sense out of the second one. Because what this does is this initially picks up with a guy who's just shot a couple inside this house. And as he's standing in front of this kind of wall, right, with all this alien paraphernalia, in the middle is a depiction of a white Martian. Now, people who are familiar with the Martian Manhunter mythos immediately know the deal behind this. For those of you guys who are not, there are different interpretations of how the white Martians came to be in the Manhunter mythos. The most generally accepted interpretation, as far as I'm aware, comes from Grant Morrison's JLA run. And the idea is that at one point, there were no green Martians or, white Martians or even blue Martians. There were simply just the Martian race. The burning is what they would call it. And they would procreate using fire. But because of how dangerous they were and how warlike they were, the Guardians of the Universe, the ones who created the Green Lanterns, they actually split the burning race into several different races, right? The green, the blue, and the white. And then in turn, they gave them an inherent fear of fire in order to make sure they could never actually use fire in order to procreate. And so that's why you end up having the peaceful green Martians, which is where Martian Manhunter's from, and the warlike white Martians who were always looking to destroy Martian Manhunter and seemingly conquer the Earth. And so again, there are different interpretations of this. The New 52, for example, has its version, but again, most people seem to really be a fan of the JLA version from Grant Morrison's run. But what matters is this, right? As he takes out a cigarette and he lights it, he's kind of come to terms with what he's seeing. And in fact, the Manhunter actually starts to manifest with him for the first time, instead of being this disembodied ghost trying to understand its purpose and trying to understand the nature of John. Because what it tells him is what happens in your head also happens. And initially, John's just kind of like, Martians? Really? That's what all this is. And so initially, the Manhunter kind of talks to him and says, resistance is futile, but not how you think. And John doesn't want to hear it, right? He's like, dude, stop talking to me. But everywhere he goes, the Manhunter appears. And it's kind of funny. He's appearing as a stop sign. He's appearing in a newspaper article, right? It's just kind of nuts, right? He's like, none of this makes sense. Leave me alone. And that's where the Manhunter's like, understanding comes later. Total, complete, full understanding would result in mind self-destruction. So if I told you everything you needed to know now, your mind would literally shut down. You wouldn't be able to handle it. You have to come to terms with it on your own. You have to process it in a way that your brain can handle. And so that's where the Manhunter touches his face and he says, memory of honeymoon with Bridget, lying exhausted, content, close in warmth of leaf fractured light, everything just as it's supposed to be, the world still making sense, smell of mom baking famous cinnamon rolls after school, the no-fail remedy for bad days, which is true. Cinnamon rolls solve all of life's problems. Taste of serotonin, oxycodone, chemicals humans haven't discovered yet, flooding the brain. And he says, and suddenly I am calm. The panic subsides. And so I wouldn't go so far as to say the Manhunter is manipulating him. The Manhunter is seemingly learning as much about John as John's learning about him. And they're learning this in real time. So they're discovering each other and what they stand for in real time. And he says, a Martian, we've been to Mars. We have pictures and there are no aliens up there. You're not from Mars. You're from too much pressure on my brain. And that's where the Manhunter says, forgive me, us, yourself. Not Martian, not literal. Symbol, outline of best fit. Martian concept, constellation, alien, different, far away. And that's when he starts to pick up on what's really going on here. The Martian Manhunter is not actually from Mars, that he doesn't know exactly where he's from, and even the explanation is a little iffy, right? He says, somewhere so distant the universe will burn out before light from Earth can reach it, a place beyond places, playground of pure, radiant thought. So seemingly the source, right? Maybe. We know that the absolute universe only came into existence because Darkseid created it. So it's also entirely possible that the place that Martian Manhunter comes from is outside of the absolute universe, the main DC universe. Now, I'm not aware of Martian Manhunter having a comic book and having any involvement in the main DC universe right now. So it's entirely possible that's the case. It's also entirely possible I missed something, right? So I think it's important to preface that, right, and to add that thought in. But the fact is, right, that the Martian Manhunter does not come from Mars. It's the form he chose because it's the form best understood by the human race. After all, how many movies have you heard about or seen of Martian invaders coming to Earth, right? It's like the one form of alien that we as human beings can process and handle if we actually saw it. And he says, we must go, John. The parents are already dead. He will soon decide on Serta Street. What happens in your head also happens. And so in effect, what he's telling him is, I am showing you visions of things that are happening right now. Now that falls in line with Martian Manhunter in DC's main universe, that for the most part his powers are psionic outside of shapeshifting. And if Grant Morrison's JLA is to be believed, it's one of the very few instances where Superman admits that Martian Manhunter is more powerful than he is. But Martian Manhunter was almost kind of the alert system for the Justice League. And in fact, in times when communication devices were compromised and the Justice League couldn't rely on, in-ear communication and so on and so forth, the Martian Manhunter would link them together. Or if there was a large enough crisis that the Justice League had to work in unison, the Martian Manhunter would do the same thing. But he's also the guy that can tell them, this is what's happening on the Earth right now, and it's happening right over there, right? So almost a kind of cosmic awareness. But John doesn't understand that. He doesn't really get what's going on. And in fact, he ends up seeing a baby in a stroller that is the Martian Manhunter. And he starts screaming at it, right? Like, what do you want? Why are you here? Right? And the Martian Manhunter's just like, we are mind, hunt, kill, save, redeem, healer. And so in essence, while John is kind of wrapped up in the panic and the chaos of it all, it's the Martian Manhunter telling him, I'm here to help you. I'm here to solve what's happening with your world, because that's when it all starts to come into play. Because John asked the question, under attack from what? And the Manhunter says, investigate, open your eyes, see people clearly for the first time. And so what you get here is this almost they live type of situation, right? Where Roddy Piper and Keith David are fighting in the alley and Roddy Piper's like, put on the glasses, like he makes them put the glasses on and he sees the world as it is for the very first time. The reality is that this world here that John Jones is a part of is not the world he knows. It's not the world he sees. He walks down the street and he sees, business signs and so on and so forth. But again, when the reality sets in and he sees the world as it is, it's a world that uses subliminal messaging to promote violence, hate, fear, despair, paranoia, rage, everywhere, right? And literally Martian Manhunter tells him evidence, socio-toxic buildup of quote unquote bad vibes. And that's where, at that point, John's like, bad vibes? Really? And the Manhunter says, process naturally occurring in unstable, unequal societies, but recent exponential increase implies outside intervention. Inescapable conclusion, complete psychoplanetary collapse imminent. Responsible entity or entities must be hunted, killed, and you must be saved, redeemed, healed. So basically, someone's causing this. Someone's spiraling the world into chaos. Yes, there is also always some measure of inequality in any society whatsoever. It's inescapable, right? There is no such thing as a perfect equality. But in this instance, someone is taking the human race's perception of that and exacerbating it, making it worse, and sending humanity on this collision course where people will ultimately destroy themselves out of irrational thoughts and feelings. And so that's why he says, we must go. Program already in progress. Trigger will soon reach Serta Street. And so he asked the question, he says, what is this, right? Why am I experiencing this? Why have you chosen me? I don't understand. And again, the Manhunter says, repeat, cannot understand, not yet. Consciousness expansion, upgrade in progress. Martian vision is only the beginning, because what he does is he kind of pulls in some of the memories of John Jones when he was a little kid and he was looking through the peephole at the fence and checking out the neighbor's seemingly fantastic legs. But he warns him and he tells him, something is coming. Somebody here is manipulating things. You have to get over there and you have to stop what's about to happen, because what happens here is you pick up with Trigger, this individual person who's walking around what is a little part of town called Old Damascus, and he starts shooting the place up. But in the process, he kind of talks to himself, right? He says, invaders, aliens from outer space, body snatchers wearing human faces, human skin. Now, these are all the thoughts of Trigger that are being fed into John Jones, because again, the natural abilities of Martian Manhunter is telepathy. But even John himself almost kind of tries to disregard everything. But ultimately, he's just sort of like, okay, let's see if there is truth to this, because if I'm being told that there's a guy who's getting ready to shoot a place up in Little Damascus, it might just be worth investigating. It might be worth looking into, even if it's fake. And so finally, they catch up to it. It's also him kind of leaning in and accepting the idea that maybe this whole Martian Manhunter thing really is what's going on. And so that, again, is when you pick up with Trigger, right? They seem to look and think like us, but they're just pretending, walking around, hoping we won't notice. Well, I noticed. I saw. And he says most of the time they get the color wrong. And when they try to speak our language, it comes out all funny. It's pretty obvious once you know what you're looking for. And again, as he's approaching these people and spraying them down, he says, in my experience, 99% of people are just pretending. Welcome to Earth. And so seemingly he's convinced that there are aliens that are taking over the human race. Now, under any normal circumstance, you and I would consider that to be schizophrenia, but there is an actual thing going on, right? It's not just paranoid schizophrenia. There's something bigger happening, because when John gets here, he immediately looks around, and because of the powers of Martian Manhunter, he's fed the thought process of Trigger as well as the thought processes of the people who lay dying. And it's a pretty crushing experience, right? The final thoughts of a person whose life is ending. Fear over the fact that they never did everything they ever wanted to do. Fear over the fact that the entire life they spent believing in a life after death may have been for nothing because they don't really know what's on the other side. And if they do follow some religious conviction, did they live their life in a way that fell in line with that religious conviction? I.e., are they going to go to hell? These are the kind of things that people are terrified of from the Martian Manhunter and John's perspective. And so what happens is that with the Manhunter jumping into Trigger's head, it gives the Manhunter the ability to kind of poke around and see what's going on, as well as feed information to John that allows him to neutralize the situation, right? Martian Manhunter is swimming through his mind, investigating. I know he loves bananas and deer hunting with his dad every season since he was 7. I know the name of his first grade best friend. And he says, Toomis, it's me, Clyde Toomis, right? Cutting hands, making themselves brothers one summer. And that initially stops Trigger dead in his tracks. And he's like, Toomis, right? Like, how long has it been? I hardly recognize you, right? So he's lying, he's faking all of this, right? But it does give him the ability to, at the very least, stop what Trigger's doing. And so that's where Trigger's like, is it really you? Right? Is it really what's going on? Now, the whole time, right, almost like a person investigating a cave or a tunnel, the Martian Manhunter's digging through all the thoughts of Trigger, right, trying to understand what's happening, what's going on. And ultimately, he figures out what's actually happening here, right? He figures out what's taking place. Now, cops arrive on the scene, and right off the bat, John tells them, like, stop, chill, right? Hold on, do not fire on this guy. And that's where he's fed information from Manhunter. And Manhunter says inside Trigger's mind, the Martian has found something. Level 18 delusion hallucination brain rotter. Invasion coded classic us versus them architecture. Very delicate destruction and construction. And with John sort of analyzing this on his own, he says it's wired together from old movies and old fears and culture going back. That in reality here, Trigger's family has a history of schizophrenia, and that Trigger himself is struggling with schizophrenia. But again, much like what John has seen out there in the world and the violent tendencies that people are engaging in, it's not inherent to the stress and anxieties that come with living in a society with varying degrees of equality, that someone is exacerbating it. And so in turn, once this whole virus is basically destroyed by Martian Manhunter, that Trigger kind of wakes up and it's just like, what have I done? Like, what is this? Like, he doesn't really understand what's happening, but it makes no difference because he's shot through the head by one of the cops and killed on the spot. But the other part of this is that with Manhunter kind of observing all of this, that he looks into the dying thoughts of Trigger, scans them for the very last time. And when Trigger was standing in front of that giant sign with that white Martian, that had entered into his brain. So seemingly, the white Martians are invading humanity, possessing individuals, and exacerbating the existing problems within the human race's culture and civilization. And so once John gets back, the Manhunter tells him, danger, disaster, doom. Worst possible finding, worse than feared. The white Martian has come to end humankind. Not only that, what seems to actually be going on here is that John Jones, as we see him in his human form, is not actually his human form, that he is literally and physically the Martian Manhunter. That's the reason why his son made him the way that he did. So again, it's wild. It's a phenomenal comic, but it's wild. But things don't really make any sense until you get to the second issue. So again, that's why we waited to cover it. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.